Pull everything.
This is how it ended. A man I'd known for 3 weeks stood in the middle of a room I'd spent 3 weeks building, and a stranger poured a $200 bottle of Chateau Margaux down the front of his suit, while 200 people laughed. He didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He picked up a linen napkin, one of the 400 I had pressed and folded into cathedral peaks that afternoon, and wiped the wine from his jaw. Then he folded the napkin, placed it on the nearest table, took out his phone. 2 words. Pull everything. 400 miles away, in a glass-walled office I didn't know existed, someone received that call, entered a code, and the $2 billion partnership that every person in this ballroom was celebrating ceased to exist. But that came later. The phone call was his. What came next was mine. Let me take you back. 6 hours. Before the wine. Before the phone. Before I took apart the most beautiful room I had ever built with my own hands, while 200 people watched. My name is Sarah Curvy. I am 28 years old. I own Curvy & Co., a boutique event architecture firm operating out of a 1,200 square foot office in Astoria, Queens, with 3 full-time employees, an espresso machine that only works on Tuesdays, and a client list that includes exactly 1 Fortune 500 company. After tonight, I am an event architect, not an event planner, not a party coordinator, not a caterer, an architect. I design rooms the way structural engineers design bridges, with load-bearing calculations, sightline mathematics, acoustic mapping, and the specific, technical understanding that a room is not a container. A room is a machine. Every element, the height of the centerpieces, the color temperature of the lighting, the distance between tables, the angle of the stage relative to the entrance, is a variable that produces an output. The output is feeling. I engineer feeling. Tonight, I had engineered the Castellano Foundation's annual partnership gala, a $2 billion celebration in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel. 200 guests, black tie, the kind of event where the champagne costs more than my rent, and the floral budget alone could have funded my company for 6 months. I had spent 3 weeks on this room. I had not slept more than 4 hours a night. I had pressed 400 linen napkins into cathedral peaks. I had calibrated 16 lighting rigs to produce the exact color temperature, 2700 Kelvin, warm amber, the shade that makes skin glow and crystal refract, and wine look like liquid jewels, that the Castellano board had approved after 7 rounds of revision. I had selected, sourced, and arranged 1,200 stems, ivory garden roses, eucalyptus, dusty miller, and the specific pale gold ranunculus that bloomed for 2 weeks in late summer and cost more per stem than some flowers cost per bouquet. I had built this room. Every surface, every angle, every shadow was mine. Teta Leila, my grandmother, who ran a catering business in Beirut for 30 years, who cooked for weddings and funerals and the celebrations of people who never learned her name. She taught me, Habibti, the woman who builds the room, controls the room. They eat because you cooked. They dance because you chose the music. They celebrate because you made the space for celebration. Never let them forget who built the feast. I had not forgotten, but the people in the room had never known. I need to tell you about Enzo. 3 weeks ago, a man walked into my office in Astoria. No appointment, no referral. He said he needed an event designed for his company, a private dinner, 40 guests, something architectural. He said he'd heard I was the best. He was 6'3". He had shoulders that made my office doorframe look like it had been built for a smaller species. His jaw was sharp. His hair was dark. His stubble was permanent, and his eyes were ice gray, the color of winter on water, the color of a man who has seen things he does not discuss in 1,200-square-foot offices in Queens. He said his name was Enzo Valenti. He said he worked in import-export. I designed his event. We met 4 times, once for the brief, once for the site visit, once for the menu tasting, once for the final walkthrough. During those 4 meetings, I learned the following. He drank espresso without sugar. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about lighting angles and acoustic mapping that suggested he understood spatial design at a level most clients don't. And he looked at me, at all of me, the width of my hips and the fullness of my face, and the specific way I command a room when I'm working, the way people look at architecture. Not appraising, not calculating, admiring, the look of a man studying a structure and thinking, this was built to last. On our 4th meeting, I mentioned the Castellano Gala. I mentioned that it was the biggest contract of my career. I mentioned, casually, the way you mention things that aren't casual at all, that I was going alone. Take me, he said. I'm not taking a client to a work event. Then take me as a date. I don't date clients. I'm not your client anymore. The event is designed. The invoice is paid. I'm a man asking a woman if he can sit at her table. He paused. I'll sit wherever you put me. I won't announce myself. I won't network. I'll be the man in the navy suit who came because you asked. I made him a seating card, hand calligraphed, the way I make all my cards. Black ink, ivory stock, the specific italic script Teta Leila used on her menus in Beirut. Enzo Valenti, Table 12. Table 12 was the service table, the staff table, the table where my team eats between courses, where the waiters take their breaks, where the event architect sits when she's not circulating. It was the worst table in the room, tucked behind a column, no sight line to the stage, fluorescent spill from the service corridor leaking under the partition. He asked for table 12. He wanted to sit at MY table, not the VIP section, not the investor circle, at the table behind the column where no one looks. I should have wondered why a man who worked in import-export didn't want to be seen. Before I tell you what happened in the ballroom, answer me this. When a man who fills door frames and speaks in 2-word sentences asks to sit at your service table at the biggest gala of your career, and you're a woman who builds rooms for other people's celebrations and has never been the celebration herself, do you let him in? Do you build this evening with him inside your room, or do you burn the seating card and tell him that your career is too fragile for a man with shoulders like weather and eyes like a locked door? Tell me now. I'll ask again at the end. Insult 1 happened at 6:47 p.m. in the service corridor. I was carrying my production clipboard, the master document, the Bible, the 40-page breakdown of every element in the room, timed to the minute, when Dominic Castellano came through the corridor. Dominic was the CEO's eldest son, 40, silver-streaked hair, the kind of man who wore his suit like a verdict. He had inherited the arrogance of wealth, without inheriting the work that produced it, and he moved through the service corridor, my corridor, the space I had been managing for 3 weeks, like a man walking through a room that had built itself. His shoulder hit my clipboard, papers scattered. He didn't stop. Watch where you're standing, he said, over his shoulder, without turning. I picked up the papers. I reassembled the timeline. I did not say anything, because I was the event architect, and the event architect does not create scenes in service corridors. The event architect absorbs. Insult 2 happened at 7:15 p.m. at the ballroom entrance. I was walking toward the main doors, the double-height gilded doors that opened onto the grand ballroom, my ballroom, the room I had spent 3 weeks engineering, when a hand stopped me. "Staff use the side door, sweetheart." Dominic, standing at the entrance with 2 board members, champagne in hand, gesturing toward the service corridor I had just come from. "I'm the event architect," I said. "I designed this room, and it's lovely. Side door. I used the side door. I entered through the service door. I stood behind the partition, and I looked at my room. It was perfect. The light was perfect. The flowers were perfect. The crystal was refracting at the exact angle I had calculated, 43 degrees from the chandelier to the centerpiece, producing the prismatic scatter that makes a ballroom look like the inside of a diamond. 200 guests moved through a space I had engineered to make them feel wealthy and welcomed and important, and not one of them knew my name. I had built this room. They were standing in my architecture, and the man who owned the celebration had just sent me through the staff door. Insult 3 came from the stage. Dominic took the microphone at 8:30 p.m. for the welcome address. He thanked the board. He thanked the investors. He thanked the partners, the advisory council, and the hotel management team. Then he said, "And of course, a special thanks to our charming little party planner for putting together such a pretty room." Charming, little, party planner, pretty room. 4 words, each one a reduction. Charming, not professional. Little, not significant. Party planner, not architect. Pretty room, not the 16 lighting rigs calibrated to 2700 Kelvin, the 1200 hand-selected stems, the acoustic mapping that took me 4 days, the sightline calculations, the napkins folded into cathedral peaks, the room that was a machine, designed to produce the precise feeling of significance in every person standing in it. I stood by the service partition, my clipboard against my chest, my grandmother's bangle cold on my wrist. Sarah's assistant, Jules, touched my elbow. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "He called you a party planner." I heard. "You built this room in 3 weeks with no sleep and a budget he changed 4 times." "I know what I built, Jules." An associate of Dominic's leaned toward him as he stepped off the stage. I was 3 feet away, adjusting a centerpiece that had shifted during the speech. "The event coordinator, the bigger one, she's surprisingly good." Surprisingly. The word people use when they expected less of your body and got more of your brain. I adjusted the centerpiece. I moved on. Insult 4 was the last one. It was 9:15 p.m. Enzo had been at table 12 all evening, sitting with my team, eating the staff meal, speaking quietly to Jules about the acoustic difference between Italian marble and French limestone, which was not a conversation Jules had expected to have with a date, and which she later described as either fascinating or terrifying. I genuinely can't tell. He came to find me by the centerpieces. I was adjusting the gold ranunculus. One stem had turned, catching the light wrong, producing a shadow where I hadn't planned one. He stood beside me. He didn't touch me. He occupied the space next to me, the way a wall occupies a building, structurally, permanently. Dominic saw him. Dominic had been drinking since 7 p.m. Not enough to be drunk, but enough to be honest, which is worse. He walked toward us with a wine glass in one hand and 2 board members trailing like satellites around a planet made of money and entitlement. "Well," Dominic said, looking at Enzo. "The party planner brought a date." "I'm the event architect," I said. "And yes." Dominic's eyes swept Enzo. The navy suit, expensive fabric but no label flash, the absence of a watch, the absence of cufflinks, the absence of every signifier that men in this room use to announce their worth. He saw a big man in a plain suit sitting at the service table. He saw nobody. "Nice suit," Dominic said. "Is that off the rack?" He turned to the board members. "I think the help is bringing their dates now." His ice-gray eyes rested on Dominic with the specific, weighted patience of a man who has been insulted by professionals and considers this amateur hour. "Can I get you something?" Dominic asked, the smile widening. "A drink? A taxi? A suit that fits?" "Dominic," I said. My voice was the event architect voice, calm, level, the voice that manages rooms. "He's my guest." "Your guest is sitting at the staff table, sweetheart. I think that tells us everything we need to know about where he belongs." Dominic lifted his wine glass. A full glass, Chateau Margaux, $200 a bottle, the deep, dark red that I had specifically selected for this event because it caught the 2700 Kelvin light like liquid garnet. He poured it down the front of Enzo's suit. The laughter came immediately. "Not all 200 guests. Maybe 30, 40. Enough. Enough to fill the room with the sound of people who believe that humiliation is entertainment when it happens to someone who can't fight back." Enzo didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a hand. He picked up a napkin, one of my napkins, my cathedral peaks, the linen I had pressed at 5 a.m., and wiped the wine from his jaw. He folded the napkin. He placed it on the nearest table. Then he looked at Dominic. The ice-gray eyes held nothing. No anger, no humiliation, nothing except the vast, bottomless patience of a man who owns the ground other men stand on and has decided, in this moment, to let the ground speak. "I hope that made you feel important," Enzo said. He took out his phone. He pressed one button. "This is Enzo. Pull everything connected to Castellano. Immediately. 2 words. Pull everything." He put the phone away. He looked at me. Not at Dominic. At me. "I'm sorry about the suit," he said. As if I had poured the wine. As if the napkin was the injury and not the insult. 90 seconds. That is how long it took for the $2 billion partnership celebration to become a $2 billion partnership funeral. I didn't know what was happening. I watched it happen the way you watch a storm from inside a building you designed, aware of the structural implications, unable to stop the weather. Dominic's CFO appeared at the side of the stage, tablet in hand, face the color of the marble I had spent 4 days polishing. He whispered something to the board chairman. The chairman's jaw went rigid. He pulled out his phone. Across the room, phones buzzed. Not 1 or 2, a cascade, a chain reaction, the specific digital avalanche that happens when large amounts of money move suddenly, and the people attached to that money feel the vibration in their pockets. The board chairman crossed the room. He stopped in front of Dominic, who was still holding the empty wine glass, still wearing the arrogant smile, still standing in the echo of laughter that was dying the way laughter dies when the room realizes the joke is on them. "Dominic," the chairman said. His voice was low, but I was 3 feet away, and the acoustic mapping I had designed for this room meant that low voices carried with perfect clarity to the nearest structural surface, which was me. "The Valenti Group has frozen all consortium positions. Every single one. 60% of our funding has been suspended." Dominic blinked. The Valenti Group. Enzo Valenti. Valenti Holdings. The man whose suit you just ruined. The chairman's voice cracked. "He holds 60% of the consortium fund, Dominic. 60%. The man you poured wine on is the majority stakeholder of every deal being celebrated in this room tonight. The wine glass slipped from Dominic's fingers. It hit the marble floor, my marble floor, the floor I had polished, and shattered into the silence. Dominic turned. He looked at Enzo. For the first time all evening, he saw him. The height, the shoulders, the ice-gray eyes that were not the eyes of a man in a cheap suit, but the eyes of a man who had been watching Dominic Castellano play king in a room owned by someone else. "That's not," Dominic started. "The seating card says table 12, the chairman said. The service table. He was sitting at the service table. Dominic, by choice. The room was silent. 200 people, not a sound. And Dominic, because Dominic was the kind of man who, when the ground vanishes, looks for someone smaller to blame, turned to me. "This is your fault," he said. "You brought him. You put him at the service table. I built this room," I said. My voice came out flat. Not angry, not trembling, flat. The frequency of a woman whose anger is so clean, it doesn't need volume. Every light in this ballroom is mine. Every flower is mine. Every napkin you wiped your hands on was pressed by my team at 5 a.m. Every sightline, every acoustic angle, every degree of color temperature was calculated by me. You are standing in 3 weeks of my work. You called me a party planner. You sent me through the staff door. You thanked me from the stage with 4 words that reduced my name, my company, and my profession to a punchline. I looked at the room, my architecture. "And now," I said, "I'm taking it back." I pressed my earpiece. Jules. Kill the lights. The warm amber died. The 2700 Kelvin light I had calibrated for 3 weeks. The light that made skin glow and crystal refract, and 200 people feel significant, was replaced by the flat, cold, institutional fluorescent of the service overheads. The room changed. Without the light, the grand ballroom was not grand. It was a box. A large, expensive box with marble floors and high ceilings, but a box. The magic was not in the walls. The magic was in the engineering. My engineering. Jules moved first. Then my team. 7 people in black. The people who had built this room alongside me, who had slept 4 hours a night for 3 weeks, who had pressed napkins and calibrated rigs and arranged 1,200 stems. They began removing the centerpieces. They began boxing the flowers. They began collecting the napkins, my cathedral peaks, each one unfolded from its architecture and placed in a service bin. The gala was being unbuilt, not vandalized, not destroyed, unbuilt. The way an architect takes apart a structure, with knowledge, with care, with the specific precision of a person who knows where every bolt is, because she placed every bolt. "You can't do this," Dominic said. He was standing in the center of the room, the center I had designed as the focal convergence point, where every sightline met, where the chandeliers aligned, where the speaker was supposed to feel like the most important person in the room. He was standing in the architecture of importance, and the architecture was being removed from under him. "I designed this room under a service contract," I said. "The contract specifies that Curvy & Co. retains ownership of all proprietary design elements, lighting configurations, and custom installations until final payment is received and a satisfaction clause is signed. You haven't signed the satisfaction clause, Mr. Castellano." I paused, and I'm not satisfied. The flowers left, the crystal left, the napkins left, the lighting rigs, 16 of them, each one mine, each one rented from my inventory, were disconnected by my team with the quiet efficiency of surgeons removing instruments from a closed patient. Within 20 minutes, The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel was a room. Just a room. Marble, walls, fluorescent light. 200 people standing in their formal wear, in a space that had been, 30 minutes ago, the most beautiful room in the city, and was now the architectural equivalent of a cleared stage after the show is over. I had built this room, and I had taken it apart with the same hands. Teta Leila's voice in my head. They eat because you cooked. They dance because you chose the music. Never let them forget who built the feast. They would not forget. I walked out of the hotel barefoot. I was carrying my heels in one hand because I had been standing for 16 hours, and my feet had declared independence from my body, approximately 4 insults ago. Enzo walked beside me, wine-stained, unhurried, his hands in his pockets, the ice-gray eyes watching the city, the way a man watches a thing he has influence over, but doesn't need to control. You took the room apart, he said. I built it. I get to take it apart. The lighting rigs alone were worth. They're mine. Every piece of proprietary equipment in that ballroom was rented from Curvy and Co. Dominic Castellano hired an architect and treated her like a caterer. Architects retain their blueprints. Enzo was quiet. The quiet of a man who is recalculating someone, not upward or downward, but inward, discovering rooms inside a person he hadn't known were there. You're not in import-export, I said, are you? I am in import-export. Enzo, you froze a $2 billion consortium with a phone call. Import-export at scale. I stopped walking. I turned. I looked at him. This man. This impossible, wine-stained, 6'3" wall of a man who had asked to sit at my service table and had not told me that his last name controlled 60% of every financial instrument in the room I had just dismantled. Who are you? I asked. He took something from his jacket pocket. The seating card. My seating card. Ivory stock. Black ink. The italic script Teta Leila used on her menus. Enzo Valenti. Table 12. I'm the man who sat at table 12, he said. By choice. Because table 12 is where you sit. And the most important seat in any room is the one next to the woman who built it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters tonight. He held my gaze. The ice-gray eyes. Warm now. The gray of dawn rather than winter. You asked me not to announce myself. You wanted to earn the room on your own. I respected that. And when a man poured wine on me to humiliate you, because that's what it was, Sarah, he wasn't pouring wine on me. He was pouring it on the woman who brought me. He was saying that your date, your taste, your judgment was as worthless as the service table. I did the one thing I could do without taking your room from you. You pulled the money. I pulled the money, but you pulled the room, and between the two of us, he paused. The fraction of a smile, the architecture of warmth in a man built for winter. You were more terrifying. I'm not going to tell you what happened after the parking lot. Not yet. That's for next time. But I'll tell you this. The seating card is on my desk in Astoria. Enzo Valenti, table 12, ivory stock, black ink, Teta Leila's italic. And every morning, when I open the office and start the espresso machine that only works on Tuesdays, I look at that card, and I remember what my grandmother told me in Beirut, standing in the kitchen of a rich family's villa while they celebrated on the terrace. The woman who builds the room controls the room. I built it. I controlled it. And when they poured wine on the man I brought into it, I took the room apart with the same hands that built it, and I walked out, barefoot, carrying my heels, next to a man whose name I hadn't fully understood, and whose eyes, when he looked at me in the parking lot, said the thing that Dominic Castellano and every person like him will never comprehend. The most important person in any room is not the one who pays for it. It's the one who builds it. If you are the woman who builds, the woman who presses the napkins and calibrates the lights and folds the cathedral peaks and walks through the staff door, while someone else takes the stage and calls your masterpiece a pretty room, I made this for you. Hit subscribe. Share this with the woman who has been building rooms for people who never learn her name. And tell me, did you pick build or burn? Because I picked both. Teta Layla would have been proud. New story every week. Hit the bell. And if you want to know what Enzo Valenti actually does for a living, and why table 12 was not the worst seat in the room but the most protected, you'll have to come back for that.